Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to be back with you. I just got in from New York where we had a good time, a mission trip to Brooklyn where we got to serve some kids and help a ministry that serves kids. And it was a really good time. Lana did such a great job, didn't she? Thank y'all for tuning in. I was there in the dorms, in the hallway, Carrie Prowse and I listening to her. It was fun. Good morning. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to log on and to get started. I'm excited about today's message. It's going to be fun, especially for women. Men, y'all are going to find it interesting, and hopefully there can be some more understanding of some things that Jesus says at the end of his life. We're going to be talking about Jewish weddings and their culture and their community. Good morning. Thank you. Oh, so we're just going to take a few minutes and let everyone log on. And we are going to dig into 14. And I told you it was with a twist because really what I'm going to talk about today is nothing that you read and studied. This chapter's short. And I believe that if you did your studying, you probably know what was going on. There wasn't a lot to pull out of it that I thought you wouldn't know. But it was a perfect setting for me to talk about something that I talked about in chapter 1 with my small group. I do the small group on a Wednesday morning, and we talked about the topic today in chapter 1 with Mary and Joseph and the whole betrothal process and what that was like. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So it looks like there's a lot of people on. So we're going to dig in, get started, and like I say, what I'm going to talk to you about today isn't necessarily in the text, but it's important to understand. It was a good point for me to squeeze it in because we need to know this information for several chapters coming up on several different levels. And so let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 14. And it starts off with John the Baptist getting beheaded. Remember last time we saw or heard from him, he was in prison and he had sent a message by his disciples to Jesus saying, are you the guy that is supposed to be the Messiah, or should I expect somebody else? Because, hey, you're supposed to set the captive free and I'm still in jail. And sadly, that is not part of God's plan. When my group read about it, we were kind of heartbroken for John and his mother. But Jesus isn't just not going to set him free. This whole thing foreshadows suffering for the kingdom, which we know that Jesus is going to suffer way more than John the Baptist did. So what had happened was John the Baptist had told Herod Antipas. Now remember, he's the tetrarch. I don't know. That's a weird, my mouth doesn't want to say it. He is the ruler of a certain area, Galilee and Perea, and a tetrarch is 2 steps down from a king. His dad was King Herod, the horrible, or King Herod the Great that killed babies when Jesus was born. And after he died, all of his sons that were Herod's got section of the land. So he has his section, and he married his brother's wife, Herodias. Herodias was not only his brother's wife, but she was the daughter of another brother. So these 2 brothers married Herodias, but she was also their niece. And I had attached a family tree of that, and I kind of highlighted in different colors the 3 different people involved here. So you can take a look at that, and it can kind of make sense and sink in. So with her original husband, she has a daughter named Salome. And she ends up marrying Herod Antipas later, and Salome is doing a very seductive, erotic dance for Herod. And in return, he tells her, for the dance, you can have anything you want. And she said, I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. That was kind of for her mother, and it was an oath, and he couldn't go back on it, so he had to deliver. And this is a very similar story to King Ahab and Jezebel during Elijah's day. If you ever want to go read about that, it's 1 Kings 16 through 22. And we know that John the Baptist is very much like Elijah, and he had a very similar situation with a crazy woman of a king wanting him dead because he spoke out about righteousness. So After that, we go into Jesus feeding the 5,000, and that's where we're going to pick up. I'm going to read in verse 13, and it says, when Jesus heard about it, talking about John the Baptist's beheading, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns, and he stepped ashore. He saw a huge crowd and felt compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, Luke 9 tells us that this land is Bethsaida. Bethsaida is the home of Peter, Andrew, and Philip, and it's a fishing town. It's on the northeastern shore of Galilee. So if you look at your map, go to the Sea of Galilee, and right in the northern shore, you are going to see Bethsaida, Capernaum, and on some maps, you will see Chorazin. Now, a couple of chapters ago, Jesus says, woe to you to all of these cities because they were seeing great miracles and they weren't repenting. They're known as the triangle cities because if you look, they form a triangle. This is where Jesus did most of his miracles, most of his teachings, and they were rejecting him. And we are in Bethsaida, the home of some of his disciples. What we're going to do this morning, instead of talking about the 5,000, because I feel like most of you, if you've ever been in church, you know the story. Which one thing that I will point out was this was a very wholesome, meek display right next to Herod's big banquet. He just had a lavish banquet. There was erotic dancing. And then the very next section shows Jesus with very humble loaves and fishes feeding the multitude. And it was just showing opposite, I lost my words, but just showing that Jesus's way is very different than worldly ways. So we're going to talk about Bethsaida a little bit this morning, and I hope it's going to be fun, and we've got 9 minutes left, and so I can already tell we're going to go over. But I added a picture last night of an insula. An insula is a household. So anytime you read in the Bible, I would say most of the time when you see the word house, it is talking about insula. Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Not his house like we think about it. Like in my house, I have Newly and I have my 2 daughters. This was insula. It's a large house with many rooms built around an enclosed courtyard. So you saw the courtyard in the picture. This housed grandparents, kids, aunts, uncles, cousins, and every insula could have up to 120 people living in it. Now, this is kind of my drawing to show you, and courtyard's going to be backwards, but this is kind of my drawing. You see the courtyard, and then I have little rooms built all alongside, and then you see on one of the sides, there's nothing there yet because that will be for future people. Sorry about the shaking. So what would happen is you built a room around this courtyard, you did life together with your family, and you shared everything. Responsibility, things that you owned, everything. And so when they would hear household, immediately they thought insula, and this is what would come to mind: intimacy, love, community, sharing, protection. This was a tight-knit unit, and this is what God set up because he wanted his people to live in community, and that is exactly why we do small groups, because we live very differently than community. We put up our 6-8-foot privacy fences. We lock them. We park our cars in the garage, and we put our garage door down, and most of our things happen in the backyard. Times have changed. Used to, people would sit on their front porch and enjoy their neighbors, and people would come out and talk. But now you put a nice patio on the back porch with your privacy fence, with your garage door down, so nobody will bother you. This is so different than in Jesus's time, and that's why we have small groups, because we want to build intimacy, protection, sharing, love, community. Girls would get married. They could get married when they were 12 and a half plus 1 day. But most of them married between the ages of 13 and 14. Boys would marry between the ages of 16 and 20. And the insula community would pick the bride for the bridegroom. And they didn't go out and pick the prettiest woman. In fact, beauty was never an important value in this for these people, but a woman who was pure, A woman of character, a woman who is wholesome is who they were looking for. Because remember, this wasn't just for the groom to build a house and put the garage door down and hang it on the back porch. This was insula, and they wanted someone to join in, somebody who was going to cook with the ladies and clean and raise children with this community. They wanted someone very kind, very sweet, that had something to offer the community. So what would happen was the father, the groom, and the man's best friend, or a best man, would go to the bride's family, and they would pay a bride price to the groom's family for the bride to compensate for their loss of services, because she's going to leave, and that whatever responsibility she had would leave with her. And so they would offer a bride price, and there would be an agreed upon price. And when everything was settled, the father of the groom would pour a glass of wine, hand it to his son, and his son would offer it to the bride and say, "This is a new covenant in my blood." Does that sound familiar? Anybody? Post what that sounds familiar if that sounds familiar to you. It would be a glass of red wine, and she would get the message, "This is a new covenant in my blood." And if she accepted the marriage proposal, she would drink it. And that was her way of saying, "My life is no longer my own, but it's yours." Anybody know what that is? Yes, thank you. It's communion, or the Last Supper. That's exactly what Jesus does, because we are the bride and he is the groom, and he is asking us to have a covenant with him. So what would happen at that point? She drinks the wine. She accepted. He would go back. He would tell her, "I'm going to go and prepare a place for you, and then I'm going to return." John 14, Jesus says the same thing to his disciples, that he's going to prepare a room for us. So he would go back to his insula. He would start building another room, because remember, I left a room off. So he's going to start building a room over here for his new bride. And it takes about a year to do this. But he has no idea when he's going to finish, because he cannot go get his bride until his father approves of the room. So again, in Revelation, it says, "No one knows but the Father the day or the hour of Christ's return." So when the father says, "This room is perfect for your bride," then he would go with his best man and all his friends through the streets, and all the family would join in, and there would be a procession all the way to the bride's house. Okay, so for this year, I know, isn't it fun? So for this year that he's building his house, the only communication between the two is from the best man and the maid of honor. And she is making sure that she is ready at any day, time, or hour for her groom to come, because she doesn't know when he's coming. And she is making sure she is remaining pure. And so there's this procession going down the streets, and all of a sudden the bride and her bridesmaids hear a shofar blowing. That's a ram's horn, and they know, the time is near. So they run to her, and they put her dress on, and they put her hair up, and they probably spray some perfume on her, because she's probably been working and sweating, but she doesn't have enough time to really do too much, because he's going to be there soon. And he comes and he gets his bride to bring back to the house. And so by this time, there's a huge party in the streets. They put her on a chair, and they bring her back to her new room in her new insula. And her bridesmaids take lanterns, because this is happening at night. They take their lanterns and they fill them with oil, and they trim their wicks, and they get out on the street with their lanterns. That's going to be in a parable coming up, so we need to know part of that. And this is kind of weird, and I just have to throw it in there. When they go into their chamber, they finally consummate their marriage, because they have been married for this whole year. Once she drank the wine, they were married, but they were not allowed to see each other or consummate their marriage until the insula was ready, the room in the insula, and this night. And so the best man and the maid of honor stays outside of their door, and then they consummate their marriage, and they give them some part of sheet or whatever to prove that she had been pure this entire year. And then the bridesmaid and groom share that with the community. That's weird, but purity was so important to this community. They were modest, they were pure, they were wholesome, and that was the most important thing. And so that's what it's all about. And so I love this message because it's a picture of what Jesus is doing for us. He tells his disciples, I'm going to go to my Father's house. I'm going to build a room for you. And I'm going to come back. But he doesn't know when he's going to come back. He can't come back until his Father, God, has said, okay, the insula, the room is perfect. Now, we in America, we have to sensationalize everything. And so somewhere along the way, we have turned this into a mansion, that we each are going to get our own mansions. And that's not what it is at all. God has us living in community. There's going to be a courtyard and there's going to be a house prepared, and we will do life together. This is a room he's preparing for us. And it is our job as the bride to be preparing ourselves while we wait for him. And there's going to be parables that point this out, that we need to be waiting anxiously. We need to be ready for him when he comes back. And one of the things that we do is we make sure that we're living a pure life. That was so important to this community, and they got this. When Jesus was telling them, I'm going to go and prepare a room, they got it. They knew immediately, we have to be pure for him while we wait for him. And I lost my train of thought. There was one more thing I wanted to put in. But oh, yes, the next thing that we need to be doing in our waiting period is making disciples. We have time to do this, and so we need to be reaching out. We need to be loving people, showing the love of Christ and the goodness of God, and be sharing our faith with others. So in this scenario, we had the dad, the groom's father is God, the groom is Jesus, and the best man is the Holy Spirit. So we have him living with us. We need to know that because there will be some parables talking about the last days, and part of this is in here. But also, I wanted you to understand how modest and how pure this town of Bethsaida was. This is where 3 of the disciples lived, because in 2 chapters, so in a week from today, we will be talking about Jesus taking them to Caesarea Philippi. Now, Luke puts this, I love where Luke puts this in the gospel, because he's in Bethsaida right now where we're talking, where he feeds 5,000 people. And the very next section, he puts it at Caesarea Philippi, because it is going to be a vast contrast of just a very different place. It's going to be fun. It's going to be pretty gross to find out some things on there. But I wanted you to see where he takes these Bethsaida boys in 2 chapters. So Jesus walked on water with Peter, and this was the 5,000, feeding the 5,000, and the walking on water was both miracles to deepen the disciples' faith. Remember, he keeps showing them things, and he shows a large group, they start rejecting him, so he continues to show his disciples who he is. And we're going to also see that on Thursday, that he just finally comes out and asks them, who do you say that I am? Anyway, so it's a fun chapter. There's a lot of symbolism into our relationship with the Lord, with the communion and the marriage ceremony, and we need to remain pure. We're in a covenant with our groom. We will do 15 on Thursday. No, today's Thursday. We'll do 15 on Tuesday, and then we'll do 16 next Thursday and get to finish the second half of this. Anyway, have a great week. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.